Hey, thanks so much for finding the video. Do us a favor. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe. And be sure to leave your comment. We love to interact. Enjoy the video. Let's start with the obvious. Saints season comes to an end on Sunday against Tampa Bay. The obvious answer is the turnovers, but from your vantage point, what went wrong?
The obvious answer is the turnovers.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, come on, you're not beating anybody when you turn the ball over 4 times and 3 of those turnovers turn up into touchdowns. So, self-inflicted wound. That's how it ended. And I know I've said this, but the person that told me this actually told me this 2 years ago. That the Saints are now actually the Oakland Raiders of the 1970s. Amy Trask and I were doing a show, and she was like, afterwards we spoke, and she was like, Mike, the way the things are with the Saints, it's so reminiscent of the Raiders of the 70s. And, I thought about it. I grew up in that era, and absolutely right. You win a ton of games. You get into the playoffs. You get one championship out of it. That's crazy. But you think about the 70s, with the Steelers are certainly a dominant team, and the Dolphins early on were a dominant team. The Cowboys certainly were a really good team in the NFC. But that's what the Saints have been. And you sort of remember the losses more than you remember the wins, because of how you lost. But this has been a good football team that for whatever reason or reasons have not been able to win come playoff time. And it's disappointing. And nothing in storybook in life. Every once in a while that occurs. But professionally, it's a rare occurrence for a guy to walk away or a lady to walk away from a profession and be on top. And you see it with Drew, and you understand the injuries that were involved with him, and now understand it even more after his wife pointed out the injuries he's had. But, I think a lot of times why we react to it emotionally is that eventually that's going to happen to us. We're going to walk away from our profession because of a health reason, because we're not as good as we once were. We're too old. We maybe make too much money. You're not part of the sink again, so to speak, and being able to get it all done. And we see it in our athletes, what's eventually going to happen to many of us professionally. And so you react in a certain way to it that's emotional. Very few people walk away on top of the game, and it didn't happen for Drew. It was an ugly performance all the way across the board, and so it's tough to watch it, but it happens. I saw Unitas as a kid, and saw him end it in a San Diego Chargers uniform. I saw Joe Namath, ended on a muddy field with the Rams. He wasn't the same player anymore. And you see it. It happens in every profession. And you saw it with Drew, the man upstairs is telling him to walk away, okay? Even though he brought it up last year and he thought about retiring and he had a great deal with NBC, sometimes you got to be reminded. And somebody reminds you about, hey, it's time for you to walk. It's time for you to go. And to see the injuries of this season and to see what happened in the summer with comments that he made and just so happened, the social unrest part of everything, it's almost as though the signs are telling him, hey, you've kind of overstayed here. It's time to walk. And we thank him because of, believe me, since I was a kid and I saw it from the beginning as a real young kid, he's been the most valuable football player this football team has ever had. And he brought a certain magnetism as a player that put the Saints at another level. That national reporters, the coverage of the game circled around Drew. And he became that guy. And you wanted to watch the Saints to watch Drew Brees. And, again, it didn't end like you wanted to end, and it was tough to watch. And for Saints fans, they spoiled in a lot of ways. Spoiled rotten. Man, because I grew up at a time, you got to remember, this team started in 1967 on the field, and it took them to 1987 to have a winning team and get to the playoffs.
Yeah.
That's a long stretch. You have a generation of people that have no clue of that. They maybe heard of it, but they didn't go through it. And so, he brought you respectability. Same thing with Sean. He's brought you that respectability. And now you got to go back now, and I think in an off season of reflection where you will have to take a long look in the mirror and say, I got to find me a guy that one day won't just win me games, okay? Won't just win me games, that can stand on that podium and hold the Lombardi Trophy. So if that's the case, when I've watched Jameis Winston and I've watched Taysom Hill convince me that either one of those two guys are going to be holding that Lombardi Trophy as your starting quarterback.
Well, certainly not from Taysom Hill. And I don't know if we saw enough from Jameis this year, but that is a real good question, Mike.
History tells you it does on occasion happen. Okay, Trent Dilfer was on a great Baltimore Ravens defense. That team was unbelievably defensively, and they won a title. I look back a few years ago, Nick Foles wins it with the Philadelphia Eagles. Man, listen, Coach Gibbs did it with Washington. He did it with Joe Theismann, with Doug Williams, with Mark Rippon.
Yeah.
But what do we remember Super Bowl winners? If it's Bart Starr, if it's Terry Bradshaw, if it's Greasy, if it's Montana, Aikman, Manning's plural, Brady. Okay, all those guys, Lynn Dawson in Kansas City, he won Super Bowl IV. The Chiefs ain't won squat until Mahomes comes in. Okay? And he's another guy that one day will be there. Look at Namath and the Jets. What have they won since Namath won Super Bowl III? I'm just telling you, you can win games with certain people, but I'm talking about win a title, win a Super Bowl championship. Convince me that one of those two guys can get you there. And I'm almost sit down and wait because I think it might take a little while. You have to take a long look at that and say, who can get me to the big show? Who's that type of guy to get me to the big show? Because history tells you it takes a Super Bowl caliber team with a basically Hall of Fame quarterback to do it.
We're talking about the quarterback situation and how we haven't proven or seen anything from Jameis or Taysom that proves they could be elite-level quarterbacks. Could we have said the same thing about Drew Brees in 2006?
Well, if you haven't watched him play, then my thing is, why would you even question that? I mean, he was a big-time quarterback, and the general manager drafts Phillip Rivers to knock him out. Who was starting for the Chargers?
Wasn't it back and forth with Drew and Flutie? Jog my memory here. Weren't they kind of sharing time too?
Early on in his career, him and Flutie, but they drafted Phillip Rivers to be the guy. Okay, their GM, that was his guy.
Mm-hmm.
Who was starting at the end for the Chargers?
Well, I mean, Drew's when he got hurt.
It was Drew. Okay, so that argument holds no weight. You're in a leaky boat if that's your argument. You sinking fast. In essence, he was the better player than Rivers. The big question mark was Drew was not that he was a championship-style quarterback. The big question mark was health, because he was coming off of an injury that at that time not a lot of people had come back from. And so you took a chance. And he wasn't Sean's first choice. Sean tried to trade for Tony Romo early on. They just couldn't piece together a deal to come up with Romo. And in events that just are unbelievable, that, there was a doctor that flunked Breeze in Miami.
Right.
Okay, Nick Saban's there. And just think about how those events would have happened with a healthy Drew Brees in Miami with Saban, with that running game. And, how long his tenure might have been there and what he did to change back again, not only the SEC, but also college football. So the question was not, was he a really good quarterback and a championship-style quarterback? He had the potential to do it. The big question was, could he be healthy enough to do it? And the first year when Drew was here in '06, man, it was almost like watching him throw now. I mean, he hadn't fully come back from the surgery, and about as long as he could throw the football was like 15 to 20 yards early on. And I'll never forget how you could almost like I can picture and hear Doug Marrone saying, if anybody touches him, you in for a battle with me. That was Doug back then, man. Doug was like, listen, whatever we got to do, we got to protect him. Nobody touch him. He was almost like put in the glass box and just break it when you need it. And Matt, I'll look back at '06. I'm not sure that is not the best coaching job that Sean Payton ever did. When you think about 28 new players on a roster, a team that was basically on, just hanging on from the year before the events, weather-wise, certainly with the storms and Katrina and everything else, and how Sean was able to piece that together. And this team went to the NFC Championship game.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that to me is unbelievable, how you were able to do that in such a short period of time, and Drew being the catalyst of that. And that was a special time to cover that team, especially for me, because, you had been through Hazelate and Ditka and all the rest of them.
Every time.
And old Jimmy, he was fighting the world every day of his life. And Sean came in here and he was sort of brash, and we didn't know how that would work out because, they both had the same temperament, but they made it work so well throughout all those years. And I think that's the thing that I'll always look back at, that they were both strong-willed. They both had certain things that they wanted to do and how to do it. And yet they were able to make it work. And just great respect, mutual respect for one another. A lot of times it ends ugly with a coach and a successful quarterback. I go back to, I've heard Terry Bradshaw make this speech so many times about how him and Chuck Noll, it ended so badly between them, and they won 4 Super Bowls.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCartney at the end, how it ended between those two guys. At the end, Tom Brady, Bill Belichick.
Yeah,
it ended badly for them, and yet these two guys were able to make it work. It's really an amazing run because a lot of times egos get involved. Really, and listen, when you have that type of success, you can understand why. But they made it work.
Let's look at other spots where the Saints are clearly going to move on. I could rattle off names. Jared Cook's not going to be back. It's obviously Drew's not going to be back. Quan's not going to be back at $13 million. Where do you see the spots on this roster where the turnover is obvious and the replacement is imperative?
Well, one, I think you're going to have to take a long look at that secondary. If you're going to sink free agent money or in extensions and draft picks, I think it's got to be there. You've got certainly in one spot with Marshawn Lattimore, but on flip it, Jackrabbit still can play, but he is getting up in age. Patrick Robinson, way up in age. Tell me the next corner.
This year it would have been PJ, but he's also a free agent.
Also a free agent. So to me, cornerback is pop real quick. The other part, too, is what do you do in the secondary? You have an older player in Malcolm Jenkins who really played well, almost from game 4 or 5 on. Man, he really picked this defense up. I thought played really, really well. I know this coaching staff wants to keep Marcus Williams. He, I think, is number one on the priority list for them to keep of all free agents. I think they want to keep Marcus, more so than Trey Hendrickson. So trying to get him signed, because it's going to cost you a few nickels to do that. Marcus ain't coming here at no discount. And, with his former secondary coach looking like he'll be in Detroit, you're going to have a tug of war there. But I think that, to me, secondary is going to be critical, because I think you're going to keep the majority of your core members defensive line-wise. You're going to lose Trey. It's just going to be too expensive for you to be able to do a deal with Hendrickson. But you got a good young prospect in Carl Granderson, who I think could end up being a really good player in this league. The linebacking core, you can see that's a situation where you might have to go and try to get Quan and do a reasonable deal for you and make it more incentive-laden for him. But, there's a lot of question marks after Demario Davis, linebacker-wise. Zach Bond, again, you don't know a lot about how well or how big of an impact he'll have. But to me, secondary jumps very quickly to mind. On the offensive side of football, my biggest concerns would be depth along the offensive line because of the fact that, and I'm talking about other than quarterback,
sure,
that Nick Easton, man, 3 concussions, you wonder about how that will work out with him. James Hurst, I've seen enough to know that I would want him back because he can play that tackle position and also play inside. Looks as though that they're going to make that move, and McCoy will swing over to right guard, and Ruiz will play center, so you're going to have to go through an adjustment period there. Tight end, I think you can get one. And I agree with you on Cook. I think he has played his last game here in New Orleans. You've got some youth and a little bit of age at receiver, certainly with Emmanuel Sanders. But you see a guy in Marquez Callaway, who I thought played really well. Deontay Harris, now it's keeping him healthy. But didn't he sort of become the guy? And that's when I knew this game might be real difficult because, man, he makes 2 plays early.
Yeah. And
you come out of that with 6 points. And it's almost like watching a baseball game and you shelling this pitcher. I mean, you getting hit after hit. And after the second inning, it's 1-0.
Yeah.
And you say, what the hell happened? We left all these guys on base, and all we got is that? So he certainly has that. I would look at a receiver somewhere in the draft. I don't know if it would be high priority for me. And again, now you're going to get some extra third-round picks, hopefully. So that may be a spot. But right off the bat, the jump to me would be at cornerback. And if I can't sign Marcus, I got to find me a free safety.
Yeah.
I got to find me a safety quickly. Just because of so much of the nickel and dime sets and people that you're going to rotate in and out of the lineup, it may be a little bit more of a defensive swing, but the big decision is going to be at quarterback and how you're going to handle that internally and also look not only for 2021, but for beyond.
Yeah.
Because I think when you make that type of decision, you're just not making it for a year. I know, like with a guy like Brady, you made kind of a 2-year commitment to him. You understood when you brought Tom in that he was going to do this for 2 years. And then, after 2 years, hopefully if you won anything, then, you're in a spot where you got a little bit of a leeway. And I think Bruce won't be there anyway. I think Bruce says, man, give me 2 years. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
I'll go back to the golf course and swing the club. Tell me where the 9-iron is. Matt, I think it's going to be a off-season of change because they've been able to keep the band together, coaching-wise, and that's starting to peel apart too. You've lost Dan Campbell. Looks as though you lose Aaron Glenn. Terry was a big part. Fontenot was a big part of the pro scouting department, and to have the coach's ear, because a lot of times that's a lot tougher job than you might think. Somebody's got to whisper in his ear about Demario Davis and say, hey, coach, I think this is a guy that would be a great fit for us. Or Malcolm Brown, he's a guy that would be a really good fit for us. Listen, James Hurst is loose. Let's bring him in to bring some depth on this football team. Let's go after Emmanuel Sanders. Somebody's got to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, and that guy's got to trust you because with Sean, he's got his own opinion on players. And so when you got that pro personnel job, and I think they may stay in house, and it may be a young man that I've known for quite some time. He's from Thibodaux, Louisiana. It may well be Mike Parrington. Mike was a guy that played at E.D. White Catholic and went to Tulane, and he's been in the Saints scouting department. I think they'll give Mike a long look at that. Mike's a young man in his business, and when you're young, that means you can work more hours.
So the Ryan Nielsen situation has come to a close. We know Nielsen will stay with the Saints. Sean Payton had this explanation earlier today.
It's always been, honestly, look, periodically you'll see something that said the Saints denied permission. Occasionally an assistant coach will ask me, look, it's going to be easier for me if you do that because I'm not at that moment in time interested in that job. And I get that.
Okay, Mike, was Ryan Nielsen really not interested in the LSU job and asked Sean Payton just to provide cover for him?
No, Ryan Nielsen walked in Monday morning and said, Coach, I'm going to LSU. Okay, so that didn't apply to Ryan. Now, I understand where Peyton's going, and I'd have to see who that coach was because I doubt seriously, that any coach that gets asked to get interviewed somewhere is saying, Coach, I don't want to interview for that job. I don't think I'm ready. That's a bunch of horse hockey. You ain't selling that to me, Jack. You ain't selling that to me. I've been around them all my life. I don't know any of them.
Oh, man.
But listen, this, and I'm almost tired of reading it and hearing it, about what a bad look this is for Sean Payton. This is business, so to speak, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Business. And Sean's looking out for number one, and that's him and the Saints. Anybody who's been in that spot, and I've been in that spot in other professions, knows that if I've got somebody really good, and I know he's good, and he's better than the average person I might hire, I'm going to do what I can to keep him. Okay, and I can make up any kind of story and tell you a little song and dance about it or whatever. But all I know is Sean did nothing wrong. Nothing. And I'd love to see Ryan. There's not a writer, reporter, anybody that has talked more about Ryan Nielsen than I have, and I've said it a lot to you about Ryan Nielsen.
You have?
On this program. There's nobody. If there is, stand up, and you and I can have a talk. Because there was no one. I've been knowing Ryan since he was the defensive line coach at Ole Miss. Ed at that time had told me, Mike, he's a stud coach. I'm just telling you. He's unbelievable. And first time I watched him work with the defensive line with the Saints, man, it was different. It was different. That guy was a lot of energy, technically sound. He was smart. You sit down with him. He's done a number of our camps. And he's way ahead of the curve. And I think he'd have been unbelievable as a defensive coordinator at LSU. Really would have been. I think Sean looked at that and said, you know what? He's a defensive version of Joe Brady. I ain't letting him leave out of here. I'm going to keep him. And we had the conversation, I think it's 2018. We sitting down talking, him and I, and we had just finished doing an interview at the Louisiana line camp. And we're talking about head coaches in the NFL. And so many of those guys are the pitch and catch coaches, the young quarterback coaches, and, offensive coordinators. And he was like, okay, every coach wants to be a head coach. Every young coach I know I've talked to, they want to be a head coach somewhere in major college football or the NFL. And, okay, I'm a defensive line coach. How many of those guys getting hired in the NFL? And it's few and far between. What was crazy that year was there was a defensive coach there that actually got a head coaching job in the NFL, and that was Brian Flores. Brian was there. He was with the Patriots, and he didn't have technically the title of defensive coordinator, but he basically sort of ran the show defensively, or he ran what Belichick wanted him to run defensively, and then he gets a job, with the Dolphins. And, every kind of comment was, hey, I got a lot of ties in the college ranks, that it might have been easier for him to get a head coaching job in college football than it would have been in the NFL. And so now you got two people tugging now, because Ed's always considered him almost like another son. I mean, they were really, really close. And I had no doubt it would work out, and I had no doubt that Ryan walked in there Monday and said, "Coach, see ya, I'm headed up the road to Baton Rouge." And Sean was like, wait a minute. All this stuff about technicalities in a contract and all that, that's horse hockey too. All that is basically a tap on the brake to say, hey, wait, give us a little bit of time to come up with something. That, hey, listen, and I know I'm losing Aaron Glenn. Dennis Allen's going for an interview. Now, this is before the Eagles hired Sirianni today, but Dennis Allen was going to get an interview in Philly. What happens to my defensive staff if I lose Glenn and Nielsen and Allen? Now, he retained 2 of the 3. It looks as though Dennis will stay as the defensive coordinator. And Ryan's going to stay as defensive line coach, assistant head coach. So, listen, I don't shortchange Sean for that. He did what was best for him. So people who are writing it or saying it, stop. If you were in Peyton's spot, you would have done the exact same thing. You're going to say, oh, yeah, why don't you go to Baton Rouge and why don't you go coach for Coach O, man? I'll find another defensive line coach. Yeah, right. He knew what he had in Ryan Nielsen. Now, the same people that are squawking about Nielsen, when I told you this a month and a half ago or whatever it was when the season ended, that first name, and I understood the interest in Marcus Freeman. He's a hot young coach, and he's a guy that has been real innovative on how he does things at Cincinnati. But he's always been a Midwestern guy. People I had talked to at Cincinnati said, I don't know if he's going to lead the Midwest to go, in the SEC, because, and if he does, he's one and done, and that would have been fine with me. I had no issue with that. But, he's got a big family, and that, listen, I think it would be a tough pull to get him away. And, he can do what he needs. And then Notre Dame jumps in. Okay. Notre Dame ain't a high-profile team.
Right.
Come on, they're a high-profile team too. And he's going to be one and gone, and he's going to be a head coach next year, and God bless him. What I told you, Ryan Nielsen.
You did.
Man, they were
First
throwing all this
mouth.
stuff out. Derek Mason, Joe Barry, all these other cats. Okay, that's great and fine. Oh, Ryan Nielsen's never been a defensive coordinator at a major college. So the same cats that are writing and telling you that, oh, well, I don't know about Ryan Nielsen because he's never been a coordinator before. My thing about it is, now you squawking that he couldn't leave the Saints to go to LSU. It's the same people. Same people writing it, telling you on radio, television, they're still squawking about it, even today. So you got to say, okay, we didn't get the first 2 choices. Marcus decides to stay close to home, and if he makes the move, and I understand that, moving from Cincinnati to Notre Dame, and Ryan, I get it, okay? He maybe feels as though that this is a pretty good spot for him, and that maybe he can turn this over very quickly to become a head coach. Maybe that wasn't maybe the thought maybe 2 years ago in the summer of 2018, but maybe he feels this is his spot to get an opportunity to be a head coach. If it's in major college football, if it's in the NFL, who knows what they do with head coaches today. But he'd be against the norm. You look at this past weekend. Sean Payton, Bruce Arians, where did they coach? On offense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay, where they coach?
Offense, yeah.
Andy Reid, where he coach?
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Stefanski, where he coach? Offense, right? Okay, now John Harbaugh, he's a special teams coach. And Sean McDermott, man, I'm just telling you, Sean can coach. He don't have the greatest roster in the world at Buffalo, but that dude can coach. And he's a defensive-oriented coach. So of all 8, one of them are on defense. One of the 8, which is remarkable today that, that how this league has changed. So, for Ed, he's always said, I got a short list, and then I got a secondary list of a couple guys that I'm going to try to hit. If 1 and 2 don't work out, you go to 3. And it's just like that in any other business. That if it doesn't work out, you go to your 3 guy, your 4 guy, and you go to that. It's no knock on the guy that gets it, that he wasn't the number 1 pick. I remember years ago, I hope Aviary ain't listening to this because he's gonna get mad. Because him and Vince Lombardi Jr. didn't get along too good. But because he was his GM in the USFL, and Vince would talk about his dad. And he was like, my dad, nobody was breaking down the doors to get him when he was in New York, and he was the offensive coordinator because the head coach there he was sort of just a figurehead. Landry coached the defense, Lombardi coached the offense. He was the fourth choice of the Packers. And he said, you know what? My dad never was upset about that. He was just glad to get the job. And so I think in a very short period of time, and I think much quicker than most people might, I think it'll be pretty quick. LSU will have their new defensive coordinator,
okay.
And Coach O came on with us Monday night and explained that he would let his new defensive coordinator hire the defensive analyst and also have a major say on the coaching staff, on who else gets hired. And, it's the first time I've heard him say that, that he was sort of passing the baton to whoever he brings in. And he was going to give them. Now, I'm not saying that, he's not in his ear about, listen, maybe we should hire this guy, but he basically kind of laid it out. And if all I knew is look at that depth chart along that defensive line for LSU and what I got coming back and what I got coming in, and take a pretty good look at that secondary, I said, you know what, maybe I can coach that team pretty good too. Listen, you do have a lot. And he's going to get a phone call out of the blue from somebody you wouldn't think. I'm just telling you, because I've been through searches like that before and helped search committees look for head coaches. And, you kind of look at one guy or two people, and then all of a sudden there's another candidate that comes in late that says, I'm interested. Guess what? LSU did that with Nick Saban.
Mike, you took the words off the tip of my tongue. It's exactly what happened with Nick. They were moving on to coordinators, and then all of a sudden, boom, here's Sean Toohey and Jimmy Sexton dangling Nick Saban.
And so people don't realize what kind of goes on in a coaching search, especially at that level, that there's a lot of variables happening and sort of passing here and there, and you're getting phone calls from everybody now. And everybody wants to give them a favorite. Yeah, I got a brother-in-law's brother and his son. He knows so-and-so. And, I played on a team with so-and-so and this guy and that guy, and he would like to leave, so keep him in mind. I'm just telling you, you're going to get a phone call from somebody that you would not have expected you're going to get that phone call from. And it's happened so many times for coaching searches. And think about how LSU got Coach O. Okay, wasn't the search at one time centered around Jimbo Fisher? And then, that ain't happening. Well, let's go to Tom Herman. Tom sort of used you to get to the Texas job. And so, and then Oliva decides he goes in that direction. Nick Saban was not the first, second, or third choice at University of Alabama.
It's true.
They wanted Rich Rodriguez. Now, listen, nothing against Rich because, him and I go back a long time. But, man, my thing is, if they hire Rich, LSU's going to be winning a lot of games in the SEC. A lot of championships with Rich Rod at Alabama. So, man, you just don't know, Matt, kind of how this ends up. But the thing about, man, it's a bad look for Sean Payton. Man, it ain't no bad look. If you've been in his position, you doing exactly what he does. You protecting number one. And number one was him in the Saints.
Ask Mike, any LSU players returning for another year, or is the LSU players returning for another year Ed Ogeron's best recruiting job since being at LSU?
Yeah, I think that's a good text and a good one. Because, listen, I would have bet a lot of money Allie Gay wasn't returning.
Same, especially after the way he debuted.
Man, after the way he played and the lack of pass rushers in the NFL, I'd have thought he's out of here. He's 88 now. The gate, he's gone. And I'm almost surprised with Derry. Not quite at that same level, but yeah, he was a surprise to me that Rosenthal would return to.
Let's see. Ask Mike, do we have any idea who the defensive coordinator will be at LSU?
I have no idea, and they're not paying me to do it.
All right.
If they were, I could give you maybe some, but I'm out of that. I'm not in this search. Put it to you that way.
Would it be a mistake to let Jameis walk?
No, my thing is, what do you want Jameis to do? What are you looking at, Jameis, to compete against Taysom Hill? Okay, is that what you're trying to say? My thing again, is he talented? Can he win games? Yeah, I think he can win games for you. Can he win you a championship? I'm not in here to win $10. I'm here to win the whole shooting match out of this. So mistake or not mistake, my thing would be is I will try to find a quarterback that I think somewhere down the line, if it's 2021, 22, 20, is going to win me a championship.
Ask Mike how many quarterbacks go in round 1 of the draft.
5.
Ask Mike, do the Saints keep David Onyemata around?
Yeah, he just signed an extension.
Ask Mike, can the Saints keep both Lattimore and Ramczyk long-term with the salary cap challenges?
Yeah, I think you can. It's going to be challenging, but I do think you don't let either one of those two guys walk.
Ask Mike, who starts at quarterback for the Saints next season?
Okay, give me the roster, and I'll tell you. No, listen.
That was the inevitable one.
Yeah, give me the roster, and I'll take a look at it.
Ask Mike, do you think Elias Ricks and Eric Gilbert are on the roster at LSU next season?
Man, Eric, Matt, have you ever seen a stranger story than that? I mean, that thing has taken so many twists and turns. Good gracious. The Ricks thing, I call a friend of mine out on the coast who says, man, I'm hearing this stuff about Ricks. He said, but I just talked to the people here at USC. They don't know nothing about it.
I know. Mike, we got about 10.
You know how that starts.
I know, man. Mike Detillier, the best as always. Thank you for the time. We'll talk next week.
Thank you, Matthew.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.